Thank you for your service, soldier. It's an honor to meet you.
Understanding the context. Hollywood heroes versus real heroes. Before we tell you what happened at a movie premiere in 1951, we need to understand something important about America at that time. America had just finished World War II. The war had ended in 1945. Millions of American soldiers had come home. Some of them had been heroes. Some of them had survived impossible situations. Some of them had seen things that no human being should ever see. And many of them were dealing with something that nobody talked about, what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. At the same time, Hollywood was making movies about World War II. Movies about battles. Movies about heroism. Movies about American soldiers fighting to save the world. But most of the actors in these movies had never actually fought in World War II. Most of them had never been in combat. Most of them had never stared death in the face. Yet they were playing heroes on the big screen while real heroes were trying to rebuild their lives off-screen. This created a strange contradiction in America. The people who were making movies about heroes often weren't heroes themselves. But the real heroes were invisible. Nobody knew their names. Nobody celebrated them. They were just trying to get by. This is the world that John Wayne inhabited. And this is the context for the story that changed everything. The premiere in 1951, John Wayne was making a movie called The Sands of Iwo Jima. It was a war movie about the famous battle at Iwo Jima during World War II. The battle where American soldiers raised the American flag on a mountain in the Pacific Ocean. The battle that had become a symbol of American heroism. John Wayne was the star of the movie. He played a sergeant who led his men through the horrors of war. He played a hero. The movie premiere was a massive event. There were lights. There were cameras. There were hundreds of people dressed up and celebrating. There were beautiful women. There were important men. There was champagne. There was everything that represented Hollywood glamour and success. John Wayne walked the red carpet. He smiled for the cameras. He signed autographs. He was the biggest movie star in America. He was playing a war hero on the big screen. But that's when something happened that would change his life. A man in a Marine uniform approached John Wayne in the crowd. The man was walking with a cane. One of his legs was missing. He had lost it in the war. This man had actually been at Iwo Jima. He had actually fought there. He had actually experienced what John Wayne was only pretending to experience in the movie. And when this real Marine saw John Wayne, he did something that nobody expected. He saluted him. It was a respectful, formal military salute. The kind of salute that you give to honor someone. The kind of salute that you give to acknowledge courage and service. But here's what made it powerful. The salute was filled with a complexity of emotion. It was respectful, yes. But it was also something else. It was gratitude. It was acknowledgement. It was recognition. And it was the most honest moment of the evening. Why this hook works? The audience immediately feels the emotional weight. A real hero saluting an actor playing a hero. There's something powerful and confusing about that moment. It makes people want to know more. It makes them wonder what happened next. John Wayne, the movie star Marion Morrison, that was John Wayne's real name, was born in Iowa in 1907. He had become the biggest movie star in America by the 1950s. He was famous for playing tough, brave cowboys and soldiers. He was the symbol of American masculinity. He was the hero that people wanted to be. But John Wayne had never served in the military. He had never fought in World War II. He had never experienced combat. He had spent the 1940s in Hollywood making movies while other men were dying on battlefields around the world. This wasn't entirely his fault. He had been too old when World War II started. He had family commitments. He had a movie career that was just getting off the ground. There were legitimate reasons why he didn't serve. But that didn't change the fact that he was an actor playing a soldier, while real soldiers were living the nightmare that he was only pretending to live on screen. By 1951, when he made The Sands of Iwo Jima, John Wayne was already 44 years old. He was at the height of his fame. He had made dozens of movies. He was a household name. He was the kind of famous that most people could never imagine. But inside, John Wayne carried something. He carried a kind of guilt. He knew that he was playing heroes while other men had actually been heroes. He knew that he was getting paid to pretend to be brave, while other men had actually died being brave. He never spoke about this publicly. He kept it inside. But it was there. The real Marine. Private James Sullivan, the man who saluted John Wayne that night, was Private James Sullivan. He was born in 1925. He had joined the Marines when he was 18 years old. In February 1945, James Sullivan was part of the assault on Iwo Jima. This was one of the bloodiest battles in American history. Nearly 7,000 American soldiers died. Another 20,000 were wounded. James Sullivan was one of those wounded. He was 20 years old when a Japanese machine gun burst caught his leg. He was taken to a field hospital. The leg had to be amputated. For the next several months, James Sullivan was recovering in a hospital. He was learning to live without a leg. He was dealing with phantom pain, the sensation that his leg was still there even though it was gone. He was dealing with the trauma of war. He was dealing with the knowledge that he would never be the same person again. By 1951, James Sullivan was 30 years old. He was learning to walk again with a prosthetic leg and a cane. He was trying to rebuild his life. He was trying to figure out what it meant to be a man in a body that had been damaged by war. He had gotten a job. He had some friends. He was doing okay, all things considered. But he was struggling. Most of the real heroes were struggling, and nobody was paying attention to their struggle. The unequal exchange. The difference between John Wayne and James Sullivan was stark. John Wayne was wealthy, famous, and celebrated. He played heroes in movies and the world cheered for him. James Sullivan was a real hero. He had sacrificed his leg, his health, his future. But nobody was cheering for him. Nobody knew his name. Nobody celebrated what he had done. This is the dynamic that existed in America after World War II. The fake heroes were celebrated. The real heroes were invisible. Why this section matters. Now the audience understands the contrast. John Wayne is playing a soldier, getting rich and famous doing it. James Sullivan is a real soldier, struggling to rebuild his life, completely unknown. The audience can feel the injustice of this dynamic. The moment before, John Wayne didn't know who James Sullivan was. He didn't know that a real Iwo Jima Marine was at the premiere. He didn't know that he was about to meet someone who had actually lived through what he was only pretending to live through on screen. James Sullivan had come to the premiere with a friend. He wasn't expecting to see John Wayne. He wasn't planning to meet the star. He was just a veteran going to see a movie about a battle he had fought in. When he walked into the premiere, he saw John Wayne. And something shifted inside him. James Sullivan had lived through something that most people could never understand. He had seen men die. He had seen men's bodies blown apart. He had seen the look in a man's eyes when he realized he was about to die. He had experienced pain and trauma that would stay with him for the rest of his life. And now he was looking at an actor, a wealthy, famous, celebrated actor, who was playing the role of a soldier. An actor who had never experienced any of what James Sullivan had experienced. An actor who was getting paid millions of dollars to pretend to be brave. James Sullivan's feelings were complicated. He wasn't angry exactly, but there was something there. There was a recognition of the difference between pretending and living, between acting and experiencing, between playing a role and actually being what the role required you to be. The salute. When James Sullivan approached John Wayne and raised his hand to salute, something happened that was completely unexpected. This wasn't a casual greeting. This wasn't a fan asking for an autograph. This was a formal military salute, the kind of salute that you give to honor military service. But the emotion behind the salute was complex. It contained several things at once. It contained respect. The military salute is a gesture of respect. It was James Sullivan saying to John Wayne, "I respect you as a fellow soldier." Or maybe it was more like, "I respect what you're trying to do, even if you'll never actually understand it." It contained gratitude. Because even though John Wayne had never actually fought in the war, his movies had kept the memory of the war alive. His movies had reminded people about what had happened at Iwo Jima. His movies had made sure that people didn't forget about the sacrifice. It contained irony. There was something deeply ironic about a real Marine saluting an actor playing a Marine. It was almost as if James Sullivan was saying, "This is the difference between us. This is what separates the fake heroes from the real heroes. But I'm going to salute you anyway, because I respect what you're doing." And it contained sadness. Because James Sullivan knew that he would never be as celebrated as John Wayne. He knew that he would never have the fame, the money, the recognition. He knew that his actual heroism would never be as celebrated as John Wayne's fake heroism. John Wayne's reaction when James Sullivan saluted him, John Wayne froze. He wasn't expecting it. He wasn't prepared for it. For a moment, all the famous actor disappears. All the Hollywood glamour disappears. And what remains is just a man face to face with the reality of his own pretense. John Wayne looked at James Sullivan. He looked at the cane. He looked at the empty space where a leg should have been. He looked at the uniform. He looked at the eyes of a man who had actually experienced what John Wayne was only pretending to experience. And something inside John Wayne broke. It was just for a moment. But in that moment, John Wayne understood something that no script could have taught him. He understood the difference between acting and living. He understood the difference between playing a hero and being a hero. He reached out and grabbed James Sullivan's hand. Not a casual handshake. A firm grip. A real connection. "Thank you," John Wayne said. "Thank you for everything. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your sacrifice." It was simple. It was honest. It was real. The conversation. John Wayne didn't let James Sullivan leave. Instead, he pulled him aside. He wanted to talk to him. "What's your name?" John Wayne asked. "Private James Sullivan," the Marine said. John Wayne nodded. He looked at the empty space where the leg was. He didn't look away. He didn't pretend not to notice. He looked directly at the reality of what war had done to this young man. "Were you at Iwo Jima?" John Wayne asked. "Yes, sir," James Sullivan said. "Can you tell me about it?" John Wayne asked. And James Sullivan did. He told John Wayne about the landing. He told him about the beach filled with bodies. He told him about the sound of bullets and explosions. He told him about watching friends die. He told him about the moment when he got hit. He told him about the pain. He told him about waking up in the hospital and realizing his leg was gone. John Wayne listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer fake sympathy. He just listened. And as he listened, something changed inside him. The actor disappeared. The movie star disappeared. What remained was a man who was confronted with the reality of what war actually was. All the movies he had made, all the times he had played soldiers and heroes, all of it seemed hollow now. All of it seemed insignificant in the face of what this young man had actually experienced. The weight of truth. The moment lasted about 10 minutes. But in those 10 minutes, John Wayne's relationship with his own career changed. He realized that he had been playing soldiers without understanding what it actually meant to be a soldier. He had been playing heroes without understanding what it cost to be a real hero. He had been making money and getting famous off the suffering of people like James Sullivan. People who had actually lived through the nightmare that he was only pretending to live through on screen. This realization was painful. It was uncomfortable. It made John Wayne confront something about himself that he had been avoiding for years. But it was also necessary. It was the kind of confrontation that every person needs sometimes. A moment where you're faced with the reality of your own complicity, your own privilege, your own distance from the truth. The moment after. When John Wayne and James Sullivan finished their conversation, something had shifted between them. John Wayne asked James Sullivan for his address. He asked if he could keep in touch. He asked if there was anything he could do to help. James Sullivan was surprised. He had expected nothing. He had just come to see a movie. He had not expected to have a real conversation with John Wayne. He had not expected to be seen, to be heard, to have his story matter. But John Wayne was serious. He meant what he was saying. "I want you to know," John Wayne said, "that what you did matters. What you sacrificed matters. And I'm going to make sure people remember." The changed actor after that night, something changed in John Wayne. He became more thoughtful about the roles he played. He became more aware of the difference between pretending to be a soldier and actually being a soldier. He started seeking out real veterans. He started listening to their stories. He started understanding the cost of war in a way that most people never would. When John Wayne made his next war movie, he was different. He still played the hero. But the hero was more real, more human, more complex. The hero had doubts. The hero was scared. The hero understood what he was sacrificing. John Wayne brought that new understanding to his work because of his conversation with James Sullivan. The wider impact. But more than that, John Wayne started using his fame to help veterans. He started advocating for veterans' benefits. He started raising money for veteran hospitals. He started using his platform to make sure that the real heroes weren't forgotten. This wasn't something he talked about constantly in public. He didn't make a big announcement. "I'm going to help veterans now." He just started doing it quietly, consistently, behind the scenes. And it made a difference. Real difference. Real veterans benefited from John Wayne's help. Real lives were changed because John Wayne, after meeting James Sullivan, decided that his fame could be used for something more important than just making money. The friendship that lasted John Wayne and James Sullivan stayed in touch. They became friends. This wasn't a famous person doing charity work for a poor person. This was two men who understood something about each other. One had played heroes. One had been a hero. And somehow, in the meeting of these two perspectives, something real was created. James Sullivan was invited to movie sets. He was invited to premieres. He was celebrated, for once, as the hero that he actually was. And John Wayne learned something new every time he talked to James Sullivan. Every conversation was a reminder of what real heroism looked like. Every conversation was a reminder that his acting career, as important as it was to him, was fundamentally different from the real heroism of men like James Sullivan. The changed industry. What happened between John Wayne and James Sullivan also started to change Hollywood. Other actors, inspired by John Wayne's actions, started paying attention to real veterans. Other filmmakers started consulting with real soldiers about what they were portraying on screen. It wasn't a revolution, but it was a shift. It was a recognition that there was a difference between fake heroism and real heroism, and that the real thing deserved to be honored and respected. What the salute really meant. The salute that James Sullivan gave to John Wayne at that premiere was more than just a gesture. It was a moment of honesty in a world full of pretense. In that moment, James Sullivan was saying, "I see what you're doing. I see that you're playing the role that I actually lived. I see that you'll never fully understand what I understand. But I respect you anyway, because you're trying to tell the story of what happened to us." And John Wayne, in receiving that salute, was finally confronted with the truth that he had been avoiding. The difference between pretending and living, between acting and experiencing, between being a movie star and being a real hero. The lesson about authenticity. One of the most important lessons from this story is about authenticity. John Wayne realized that authenticity matters. That there's a difference between pretending to be something and actually being something. He couldn't change the fact that he hadn't served in World War II. He couldn't change the fact that he had spent the 1940s in Hollywood while other men were fighting and dying in the Pacific. But he could acknowledge that difference. He could recognize it. He could respect the people who had actually lived through what he was only pretending to live through. This is a lesson that applies to all of us. We all have moments where we pretend to be something we're not. We all have moments where we're playing a role instead of being our authentic selves. The question is, when we're confronted with the reality of that pretense, how do we respond? Do we defend our pretense? Do we get defensive? Or do we acknowledge it? Do we accept it? Do we learn from it? John Wayne chose to acknowledge it. And his life was better for it. The lesson about privilege. John Wayne had advantages that James Sullivan never had. He was born in a time that worked in his favor. He had opportunities. He had access. He had people who believed in him. James Sullivan also had disadvantages that John Wayne never faced. He was injured. He was struggling. He was invisible. John Wayne's story teaches us something important about privilege. Having privilege doesn't make you a bad person. But what you do with your privilege matters. How you use your advantage matters. John Wayne chose to use his privilege to help James Sullivan and other veterans like him. He chose to use his fame, his money, and his platform to make sure that the real heroes weren't forgotten. That's the right choice. That's the choice that matters. The lesson about being seen and seeing others. James Sullivan had been invisible. He was a real hero, but nobody knew his name. Nobody celebrated him. He was just another struggling veteran trying to rebuild his life. But when he met John Wayne, something changed. He was seen. His story mattered. His sacrifice was acknowledged and honored. This teaches us something important about the power of seeing people. How often do we walk past people like James Sullivan? How often do we ignore the real struggles of real people because we're too busy with our own lives? John Wayne's story teaches us that if we slow down, if we listen, if we see people, we can change their lives. We can make them feel less invisible. We can make them feel like what they did matters. The lesson about humility. Perhaps the biggest lesson from this story is about humility. John Wayne could have been defensive when he met James Sullivan. He could have tried to explain why he hadn't served in the war. He could have tried to justify his career as a movie star playing soldiers. But he didn't. Instead, he listened. He acknowledged the difference. He accepted the reality that what he did was fundamentally different from what James Sullivan did. That took humility. That took the willingness to recognize that his accomplishments, as impressive as they were not the same as the accomplishments of a real soldier. Humility is understanding your place in the world. It's understanding what you have done and what you haven't done. It's understanding the difference between pretending and living. John Wayne learned humility from James Sullivan. And that humility made him a better person and a better actor. The question for you. This story asks each of us several questions. Are there people in your life who are real heroes? Have you taken the time to see them, to honor them, to listen to their stories? Do you have privileges that other people don't have? If so, what are you doing with those privileges? Are you using them to help people who are less fortunate? Are you living authentically, or are you playing a role? Are you pretending to be something you're not? And finally, if you were confronted with the reality of your own pretense, like John Wayne was, would you have the humility to accept it and change? The eternal truth. The story of John Wayne and James Sullivan is ultimately a story about transformation. It's a story about what happens when someone who has been living in privilege and pretense meets someone who has been living in reality and sacrifice. It's a story about how one moment, one honest salute, one real conversation can change a person's life. It can change their perspective. It can change how they use their advantages. It can change the kind of person they are. And it's a story that matters because it reminds us that transformation is possible, that we can be better, that we can acknowledge our limitations, that we can use what we have to help the people who have sacrificed for us. That's the message that John Wayne carried for the rest of his life. A message that came from a man with one leg who had the courage to salute an actor playing a soldier. The lasting impact. The ripple effect through decades. What happened at that movie premiere in 1951 didn't just affect John Wayne and James Sullivan. It created ripples that spread through Hollywood and beyond. Other actors started paying attention to veterans. Other filmmakers started consulting with real soldiers about what they were portraying on screen. Other people in Hollywood started recognizing that there was a difference between fake heroism and real heroism. Over the decades, this shift in attitude created tangible change. War movies became more realistic. They showed the true cost of war. They showed the trauma, the fear, the sacrifice that real soldiers experienced. And real veterans found that Hollywood was starting to pay attention to them. They found that their stories were being told more accurately. They found that they were being honored, not just used as props for entertainment. John Wayne's legacy. John Wayne continued his career as a movie star until his death in 1979. He continued to play heroes. But from that moment forward, he played heroes differently. He played them with more understanding, more respect for what real heroism meant. And off the screen, he continued to help veterans. He continued to use his platform to make sure that the real heroes weren't forgotten. He continued to listen to their stories. He continued to honor their sacrifice. When John Wayne died, the veterans he had helped throughout his life came to his funeral. They came to pay respect to a man who had finally understood the difference between pretending and living, and who had spent the second half of his life using his advantages to help the people who had sacrificed for his country. James Sullivan's legacy. James Sullivan lived a quiet life. He never became famous. He never made movies. He never had the platform that John Wayne had. But he did something more important. He lived authentically. He lived with the truth of what he had experienced. And he had the courage to salute an actor and, in doing so, change that actor's life. James Sullivan's greatest contribution wasn't something he did on purpose. It was something he did by just being himself, by being real, by being honest about what he had experienced. And in being real, in being honest, he changed a famous man's perspective. And through that famous man, he impacted countless other lives. Fire the modern relevance. In 2025, in our modern world, we still have this same dynamic. We still have people who are playing heroes on screens, in movies, on television, in video games, while real heroes are struggling in real life. We still have veterans who are dealing with PTSD, with traumatic brain injuries, with loss of limbs, with the emotional and psychological damage that war creates. And many of them are invisible. Many of them are struggling. Many of them don't have the support they need. The story of John Wayne and James Sullivan teaches us that we need to pay attention to real heroes. We need to see them. We need to listen to their stories. We need to honor their sacrifice, challenge. In 2025, we need more John Waynes. We need more people who are willing to acknowledge the difference between pretending and living. We need more people who are willing to use whatever advantages they have to help real heroes. Maybe you're not a movie star, but you have something. You have a voice. You have a platform. You have influence in some area of your life. How will you use it to help people who are struggling? How will you make sure that real heroes aren't forgotten? That's the challenge that the story of John Wayne and James Sullivan leaves us with. Final call to action. If this story moved you, if it reminded you about the difference between pretending and living, if it inspired you to honor the real heroes in your life, then smash that like button right now and subscribe. Turn on the notification bell. This channel is dedicated to stories about real courage, real heroism, and real transformation. There are more incredible stories coming that will change how you see the world and your place in it. In the comments below, tell us, do you know a real hero? Have you taken the time to honor them? Have you listened to their story? Have you made them feel seen and valued? Asterisk, asterisk. Or maybe you are a real hero. Maybe you served in the military. Maybe you sacrificed for your country. If so, we want to hear your story. We want to honor you. We want to make sure that your sacrifice is remembered and valued. Share your story in the comments. Tell us about the real heroes in your life. Because the world needs to hear these stories. The world needs to remember that real heroism exists. The world needs to honor the people who have given everything for their country and for each other. If you are a veteran, know this: your service matters. Your sacrifice matters. You are valued. You are honored. You are seen. Thank you for watching this incredible story about John Wayne and James Sullivan. Thank you for caring about real heroes. Thank you for being someone who understands the difference between pretending and living. Subscribe now and join a community of people who believe that real heroes deserve to be honored. And remember, don't forget to share this story with someone you know. Maybe it will inspire them to honor the real heroes in their life. Maybe it will remind them what actually matters. Asterisk, asterisk. See you in our next video. And thank you, from the bottom of our hearts, to all the real heroes out there who have sacrificed for us. Your legacy lives on. Your story matters. You are remembered.